Welcome to the first driver focus session on policy. What are the first images that come to mind when you hear the word policy? Does it look like the Capitol building? Maybe it looks like a school board. Maybe it looks like these young policymakers. Who makes policy? Who influences policy? Who resists or ignores policy? Who benefits from policy? And who's impacted by policy? Each of these questions point to questions of power, ownership, and the real-life experiences of young people, educators, and communities. Policy reflects agreements that were shared amongst people with power and influence enough to create and shape legal and organizational agreements that are often referred to as the system, the law, or just policy. Policy is not just the legal structures that exist, but how they are lived, interpreted, and created within different contexts. Understanding policy is an effort in understanding history, power, systems, resource allocation, and influence, aka politics. Educational policy can seem both very distant and be immediately present in the lives of young people, parents, educators, and community leaders. It's impossible to cover or even touch on every aspect or nuance of policy and how it moves through, acts on, or is changed by communities and organizations. We hope the following stories, examples, and information is provocative to your thinking about policy as a driver of educational change.
Remarks of the President after signing of the Education Bill from the front lawn of the old schoolhouse on the LBJ Ranch in Texas, April 11th, 1965.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Remarks of the President after signing of the Education Bill from the front lawn of the old schoolhouse on the LBJ Ranch in Texas, April 11th, 1965.
ladies and gentlemen, I want to welcome to this little school of my childhood many of my former schoolmates and many who went to school to me at Cotulla and Houston and San Marcos, as well as some of my dear friends from the educational institutions of this area. My Attorney General tells me that it's legal and constitutional to sign this act on Sunday, even on Palm Sunday. My minister assured me that the Lord's Day will not be violated by making into law a measure which will bring mental and moral benefit to millions of our young people. So I've chosen this time and this place for two reasons. First, I do not wish to delay by a single day the program to strengthen this nation's elementary and secondary schools. I devoutly hope that my sense of urgency will be communicated to Secretary Celebrezzi, Commissioner Keppel, and the other educational officers throughout the country who will be responsible for carrying out this program. Second, I felt a very strong desire to go back to the beginnings of my own education, to be reminded and to remind others of that magic time when the world of learning began to open before our eyes. In this one-room schoolhouse, Miss Katie Dedridge taught 8 grades at one and the same time. Come over here, Miss Katie, and sit by me, will you? From our very beginnings as a nation, we have felt a very fierce commitment to the ideal of education for everyone. It fixed itself into our democratic creed. Over a century and a quarter ago, the President of the Republic of Texas, Mirabeau B. Lamar, proclaimed education as the guardian genius of democracy, the only dictator that free men acknowledge, and the only security that free men desire. But President Lamar made the mistaken prophecy that education would be an issue, quote, in which no jarring interests are involved and no acrimonious political feelings excited. For too long, political acrimony held up our progress. For too long, children suffered while jarring interests caused stalemate in the efforts to improve our schools. Since 1946, Congress tried repeatedly and failed repeatedly to enact measures for elementary and secondary education. And now, within the past 3 weeks, the House of Representatives, by a vote of 263 to 153, and the Senate by a vote of 73 to 18, have passed the most sweeping educational bill ever to come before Congress. It represents a major new commitment of the federal government to quality and equality in the schooling that we offer our young people. I predict that all of those of both parties of Congress who supported the enactment of this legislation will be remembered in history as men and women who began a new day of greatness in American society. By passing this bill, we bridge the gap between helplessness and hope for more than 5 million educationally deprived children. We put into the hands of our youth more than 30 million new books, and into many of our schools, their first libraries. We reduce the terrible time lag in bringing new teaching techniques into the nation's classrooms. We strengthen state and local agencies which bear the burden and the challenge of better education. And we rekindle the revolution of the spirit against the tyranny of ignorance. As a son of a tenant farmer, I know that education is the only valid passport from poverty. As a former teacher, and I hope a future one, I have great expectations of what this law will mean for all of our young people. As President of the United States, I believe deeply no law I have signed or will ever sign means more to the future of America. To each and every one who contributed to this day, the nation is indebted.
When my classmates were suspended, they would disappear for days, and when they were kicked out, they would disappear even for weeks. What was most shocking to me was discovering that they were being suspended for minor infractions. Because I believed I needed to take part in improving my school, I got involved with Blocks Together, a nonprofit organization in the West Humboldt Park community, and a member of the National Dignity in Schools campaign.
Create pathways to success, not pipelines to prison.
For many young people, our schools are increasingly a gateway to the criminal justice system. What is especially concerning about this phenomenon is that it deprives our kids of their fundamental right to an education.
In place now around the assessments and around the Common Core. Are these game changers? Do you see them really taking us to a very different place in the quality of education of our kids and in the system?
I am not a believer that the Common Core will be a game changer. And I say that as a person who supports the Common Core. I think it is essential to have clear academic standards. I think it's a very important step for equity. The reason why I believe it will not be a game changer is because I have no confidence at all that it will be implemented properly. I am already seeing evidence in New York State that implemented the assessments before they did any work to ensure that the teachers were trained or the students were exposed to the curriculum, how poorly this can be done. And I have no doubt that this will continue to happen because It's part of a larger problem. The larger problem is that we have been using assessment inappropriately throughout this country since No Child Left Behind. Now, when people hear that, they take that as an argument against assessment. I am not against assessment. We absolutely must assess if we want to know how well our students are doing, or in fact they prepared for college or career or whatever else. But we have been using assessment largely for the purpose of ranking students and ranking schools. Ranking someone is not helping them. To tell a student that they are low or to tell a school that they are failing and then not provide guidance about what they need to do to improve is not a strategy for success. This is exactly what we've been doing throughout the country. And a big part of what's wrong is our policymakers continue to believe that designing the right assessment is what's going to improve our schools. Now, I want to refer you to an article by Michael Fullen that was written 2 years ago on drivers of reform. And in the article, Michael makes the case that if you look at the countries that have made the most progress in the last several years, they are relying on different drivers, and high-stakes testing is not one of them. They're focused on capacity building in schools. And let me illustrate how that works in Ontario, Canada, but more specifically Toronto, which is the largest urban district in Canada and has the greatest number of high-poverty schools, and has also had the greatest improvement over the last several years. Capacity building in Canada means that when a school is not performing based on a state assessment or provincial assessment, they then send experts in to go and figure out why and what needs to be done differently. And then they focus their professional development on precisely the areas where the students need help. Now, that sounds logical, but it's not what we do, right? That is, we tell a school they're failing, and the operative assumption is that pressure and humiliation will lead to improvement, right? So, state of Florida puts letter grades on schools, something New York State has now adopted, so you can go to an A school all the way down to an F school. The only strategy they have in place for an F school is school closure. Even though they're growing F schools in New York. Right? And all you have to do is look at those schools and you would find that those schools were set up to fail because they were overpopulated with the most disadvantaged students and staffed by the least prepared teachers. I am not a believer that this is going to change under the Common Core. In fact, I believe that the work that needs to be done to develop the curriculum and prepare the teachers, particularly in schools that are serving large numbers of English language learners and our poorest students, hasn't even started. So I am not only skeptical, I am highly critical of this whole strategy because what I see happening over and over again is we keep thinking that simply by raising the standards, we will have accomplished something. And the hard work is in going into those schools and figuring out what needs to be done to change them. We have examples of this happening now across the country, of schools that improved. And I'll say it again, we should be learning from those examples.